Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Rubin speaking to you from just east of Jerusalem. Today is the 17th day of the month of Tevet, 5782. It's December 21st, 2021, and this coming Shabbat we begin the book of Exodus, known in Hebrew as Shmot, which literally means names, the names of the children of Israel who went down into Egypt. We're going to be reading those first verses in just a few moments. Today also, as I believe either today or tomorrow, is the shortest day of the year. That means, of course, well, you all know what that means. It means the day of the least amount of hours of sunlight. So from now on, days are going to be getting longer. There'll be a little more light in our lives each day, and that's good. Here in Israel, we are experiencing our first winter storm of this season. They actually give it a name, and I read somewhere, they usually don't give storms names in Israel, and I read there's a new protocol for the Mediterranean countries that they're going to start naming the different storms, and this one was named Carmel, I guess after Mount Carmel in the north, by the city of Haifa. If you recall the story of Eliyahu, and his showdown with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, where they all set up altars and were going to offer to their various gods. And of course, the only God who answered the offering was, of course, the God of Eliyahu, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the God of Israel, the creator of the world. And you know the story. But anyway, they've named the storm Carmel. It's brought a lot of rain, very windy the past few days, a tremendous amount of rain in Israel, which is wonderful. We need the rain, even though in some places it causes flooding and damage, etc., etc. And in the north, in the Golan, and especially on Mount Hermon, in the very north of the Golan, snow, lots of snow on Mount Hermon. So winter is officially with us in date, because I believe today is also, today or tomorrow, I'm never quite sure, is the first official day of winter. And here in Israel, it's not only official, but it's real. Winter is with us. The book of Exodus, the book of Exodus is an amazing book, and the first Torah reading of Exodus, also called Exodus, actually called Shemot in Hebrew, because the Torah readings are always named after the first word or the first significant word of the first verse of that reading. And this one goes like this: Ve'ele Shemot b'nei Yisrael, and these are the names of the children of Israel. Haba'im Mitzrayima et Yaakov ish uveito ba'u. And these are the names of the children of Israel who are coming to Egypt with Yaakov. Each man and his household came, and then it runs down the names of the 12 sons of Yaakov, of Israel, and so on and so forth. And immediately we plunge into the story of the enslavement of Israel, how Yosef died. Again, verse 6, Yosef died, and all his brothers and that entire generation, the children of Israel, were fruitful, teemed, increased, and became strong. It's a very important verse, and very important verse in Hebrew. It says that Uvenei Yisrael paru v'yishritzu v'yirubu v'yatzmu b'ma'od ma'od v'timelei haaretz otam. And the children of Israel, the population grew geometrically, whatever you call it. They just grew and grew and grew, very fruitful, and this was a concern for Pharaoh. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know of Yosef. He said to his people, behold, the children of Israel are more numerous and stronger than we. Come, let us outsmart it, lest it become numerous, and it may be that if a war will occur, it too may join our enemies and wage war against us and go up from the land. So there's a bit of paranoia setting in here. The children of Israel really have been more numerous, as he implies, than the native Egyptians. I don't I find that hard to believe, but he was very concerned. And of course, the first phenomenon here is that they forgot Yosef. He forgot Yosef. What does that mean, he forgot Yosef? He literally, it wasn't taught in school. He didn't know that just a generation before, Yosef, this Hebrew slave that came out of the pit, out of the dungeon, and rose to prominence, being second in command to Pharaoh and all Egypt, and who saved the entire nation from famine and starvation. And he's forgotten just like that in the blink of an eye. Well, our sages come up with one of two explanations. One is that he really was forgotten. Yeah, these things happen. People forget real fast. Nations forget real fast. You know, we see how opinion changes in an instant. We see how opinion about Israel. Israel used to be the darling of the left. You know, Israel was the new hope. It started out with socialist roots in the early days of Israel. And, you know, it was the hope, after the Holocaust, everybody was rooting for Israel, and that's changed, hasn't it? Pretty much overnight. It happens. You know, yesterday's hero is, you know, he goes out with the dirty laundry. And the other explanation is that he intentionally forgot the good deeds of Yosef and intentionally erased that from his mind because he now saw this growing population as a threat. Things are changing very quickly. You know, when we concluded the book of Genesis last week, we noted that there was a chill in the air that already we could perceive very faintly if we read the lines carefully, that Yosef was already losing some status in the court of Pharaoh. And there's one thing that, you know, the closing line, I don't think I had a chance to talk about this last week, but the very closing line of the book of Genesis, Joseph died. Joseph died at the age of 110 years. They embalmed him and he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. In Hebrew, it goes like this. Vayamot Yosef ben me'av va'eser shanim vayachantu oto vayasem ba'aron b'mitzrayim. He put him in an aron. An aron is a box. An aron means a few things. It means a coffin, a closet. Your clothing closet in Hebrew is an aron. Your aron begadim. It's your clothing closet. It's a closet. You have an aron in your kitchen closet. Also, the aron habrit was the Ark of the Covenant because it was a box. It was a closet lying on its back, but it was a closet in which was encased, was kept the luchot habrit, the two tablets of the law, the two whole tablets and the two broken tablets. And what interests me is that the word aron is spelled Aleph, Vav, Resh, Nun. Nun Sofit, final Nun. And Aleph, Resh, Vav, Nun. And Aleph, Resh, and Vav, if we order them Aleph, Vav, Resh, it spells the word or, light. So it's interesting, the concept that a box which closes things up contains within it, in Hebrew, the word or, the word light. Now, in the case of the Aron Habrit, it makes sense because the light is the Torah. This box contains light. If you were to open that Aron, light would shine out. And even without opening it, the light of the Torah shines out and fills the world. In the case here, they put him in an Aron. They put him in a coffin. I guess it was a sarcophagus in Egypt, but it was a coffin. And so I see it as an act of, and this is the final words of the book of Genesis, closing off the light. They're putting the light in the box, the light that was Yosef, the light that was the promise, the light that was life. They're closing it and putting it in a box. And it's very interesting that the book of Genesis, which opens with creation and opens with, and God said, let there be light. And God saw the light, that it was good, that book closes with this light being shut away, as it were, in this box, in this aron. It's perhaps a very poetic way of looking at it, but it just, to me, it's the perfect conclusion to the book of Genesis, in that it's the perfect introduction and foreshadowing, really, as to what happens in the beginning of the book of Exodus, because the light's being shut out. The light is being dimmed in the world because Israel is being enslaved. That was the original answer to Pharaoh's own question that he posed to his advisors and his wise men, was what to do with this people. And so, yes, they enslaved them, but that wasn't enough, because despite the fact that they were enslaved, they kept multiplying. And that was very frustrating. The more that they tormented Israel, the more Israel multiplied. So he had to take it one step further, and that was basically genocide. So for that, of course, he employed the Hebrew midwives. And the Hebrew midwives, two of them are mentioned here. I assume they were the heads of the midwives. So I imagine there were more than just two midwives to birth all these Hebrew babies coming into the world. And they were Shifra and Puah. And of course, he told them to allow the newborn females to live, because he would eventually give them over to Egyptians, but to kill the males. And of course, they didn't. They defied the direct command of Pharaoh, the most powerful man on earth. And they did not kill the babies because they feared God. They were not going to start killing infants simply because Pharaoh said so. And when he called them and said, "What's up?" They simply lied to him. They say, well, these Hebrew women, they're not like the Egyptian women. They're more like animals in the field. By the time we get there, the child's born and they're gone. So we can't really do what you want us to do now. Of course, we're not supposed to lie. But in this case, it was a holy lie, because they were saving the lives of the Hebrew babies. They're saving the children of Israel. They're saving the Jewish nation when their act of courage. And imagine the courage it took, and the emunah, the faith, the belief, the trust in Hashem, to defy Pharaoh when they must have known that, death awaited them for doing such a thing. You don't defy Pharaoh. But of course, they didn't die, and they didn't die because God protected them. God saw that they feared him, and so God rewarded them. So plan A, enslavement, didn't do the trick for Pharaoh. Plan B, having the midwives do away with the males, didn't work for Pharaoh. So now is plan C, and that is, of course, that every Egyptian, it seems, is empowered, deputized to take the males of the Hebrews and throw them into the Nile River and drown them. Now, the Nile River, of course, was the mighty Nile River of Egypt. It was a god. It was the life of Egypt. Without the Nile, there's no life in Egypt. That's where the water comes from. That's where the irrigation comes from. They pray to the Nile. It's everything to them. And in this case, it's going to be the answer for the Jewish problem here, the Hebrew slave problem. And there's just too many of them. And I guess they couldn't find enough work for them to do. There are so many. So they want to thin them out and basically eliminate them. So, of course, then we begin the whole story of the birth of Moshe and his being hidden away in this little ark. Now, in this case, ark is not translated as Aron. It's translated as Teva, which is the same way that the same word used for the Noah's Ark. It was a teva, which is another word for box. But since we're talking about boxes, sometimes it's called an aron, sometimes a teva. It's interesting. Again, teva is is what the little basket, of a wicker basket that the parents of Moshe constructed and sealed off with pitch so that it would float on the Nile, is the same word teva as the ark that Noah built. And again, that ark sailed on the water and saved humanity. And here, this little ark with this infant is going to save humanity, as opposed to the Aron Abrit, the Ark of the Covenant, which again, in English, it's translated Ark for the Covenant, it's translated Ark for Noah, and it's translated as basket, I think, for Moshe. But that's an Aron, and this is a Teva. So we know the story that Moshe's on the water, and Pharaoh's daughter comes out to wash early in the morning with her handmaidens, and she sees this infant, hears the infant crying on the water and sees it, has her handmaidens bring it to her, and she opens it, and she sees and she sees this baby, and the baby was good, we're told. The verse says he was good. And she realized it was a Hebrew infant. She understood, she knew exactly why it was on the water, and she knew exactly what her father intended to be the fate of this infant, but she had compassion. Very fascinating, the daughter of Pharaoh, the man who has embarked upon this program of genocide. Genocide, the complete, full meaning of the word. But she has compassion for this infant, and when she brings him home, her father, does not tell her apparently to take that thing out of here and throw it back in the Nile. Apparently, he had a soft spot for his daughter, and he couldn't do that. He saw that she was totally taken by this infant. So she raises him with the help of Moshe's own biological mother, Yocheved. We'll learn her name later, Yocheved. And his father's name was Amram. And he was raised by Pharaoh's daughter with the help of Moshe's own mother, who became his wet nurse due to the intervention of Moshe's sister, who's mentioned as having stood by the little basket with Moshe in it by the Nile rivers to see what would happen. And when she saw that Pharaoh's daughter, who is given the name traditionally Bitya, which means son of Hashem, daughter of Hashem, Bitya, a very beautiful name given by our tradition to this woman who was a heroine. She was an Egyptian princess, daughter of the king, the Pharaoh, but she was a heroine. She saved this child. And again, as I was saying, Moshe's sister, who later we learn her name is Miriam, approaches, and again, another act of bravery. Here's this Hebrew woman, right, whose people have been enslaved, and she approaches the princess of Egypt and says, I can arrange for a wet nurse if you would like. And Bitya says yes. And so we know that Moshe was raised, he was nourished with his own mother's milk. And she was present until he was weaned. And then her job was over. And the rest of his youth, he was raised in Pharaoh's palace by Pharaoh's daughter. Then, of course, we learn about the first time Moshe goes, there's so much in this Torah reading. There's so much that it's a shame that we read it in a single week. Of course, you can always read it, but in terms of our reading schedule for the year, we read it in a single week. And in terms of Temple Talk, we're trying to cram as much into it as we can in this one episode. But there's just so much going on. And so, of course, the first time that Moshe leaves as a young man, steps out, and he's lived a sheltered life. He is basically a prince. Not biological, but in terms of his upbringing, he's a prince. And in theory, he could have been, the next in line to be the next Pharaoh. But he goes out, sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave, and he connects the dots immediately. He immediately connects, emotionally, spiritually, physically, in every way with the Hebrew slave, recognizes that he's his brethren, and kills the Egyptian taskmaster. Now, again, wrap your head around this. This man, Moshe, who is going to be the greatest prophet ever, the lawgiver, the man who brought down the law, the first 10 commandments, one of which is thou shalt not kill, that his first act really of any significance, and really was an act of leadership and an act that proved who he was to Hashem, is to kill the Egyptian. I don't know where to take that, but it's something that really needs pondering. And then, of course, the next day he goes out. He killed him, and then he hit him in the sand. The next day he goes out and he sees two Hebrew slaves fighting, and he intervenes. And of course, one of them says, "Who appointed you as judge, and master over us? We know what you did to that Egyptian." And Moshe realizes that the thing is known. And as soon as Pharaoh finds out, he wants to kill Moshe because, he's his adopted grandson. But, there's a limit to how much he can show his compassion to Moshe or to his daughter. So he's ready to kill Moshe. So Moshe flees. And of course, he then appears at the well in Midian, where he helps these 7 daughters of a very fascinating figure who's given all sorts of names. First, he's just referred to as the Kohen Midian, the priest of Midian. And Midian seems to be more of the name of a people than a real geographical area. It seems that it was a nomadic people. And he was somewhere in the wilderness where Israel would be many years hence. And this Kohen Midian, this priest of Midian, which meaning that he was an idolater, has 7 daughters, and Moshe is sitting at the well, and he sees that the other shepherds won't let them feed their flock, water their flock, so he intervenes and helps them along, and then they go home, and their father, who is then, the next time he's given a name, it's Ru'el. Only the 3rd time when he's named is his name Yitro, which is what we commonly refer to Yitro as, the father-in-law, eventually be the father-in-law of Moshe. But he's given, I think all in all, I think he has 7 different names. Fascinating figure. We'll talk about him more in the future. But he says to his daughters, you're home so early, what happened? They say, oh, this Egyptian guy, he helped us out, he saved us, he rescued us from these nasty shepherds, and he said he didn't invite him home. He sent him back out to invite the Egyptian guy, Moshe, who wasn't an Egyptian, but apparently, was wearing the attire of an Egyptian. And they invite him in, and before we know it, Yitro offers Moshe to marry his daughter Tzipporah. And they marry, and then, of course, we have the fascinating encounter with Moshe at the burning bush. Moshe is at the burning bush. He's taking his father-in-law's flock out, which is what he did. This is what Moshe did now, right? He began his life hidden away in the inner recesses of his parents' home, so they wouldn't be discovered and thrown into the Nile. And then when he was too big to be hidden away, he spent the next part of his life in a little basket on the Nile. And then the next part of his life he spent in the royal palace of Pharaoh. And now he spent the next part of his life on the lam, on the run. And now he's spending the next part of his life shepherding his father-in-law's sheep and goats in the wilderness, in the middle of nowhere. At this point, what has Moshe amounted to? Not a whole lot. The only thing on record is that he killed a man. Talk about humble beginnings. Talk about coming out of nowhere. But, when you keep your eye on all these events, you realize that all these events add up to what makes Moshe the great prophet and leader and lawgiver and liberator that he became. So then, of course, chapter 3 in the book of Exodus, verse 1, Moshe was shepherding the sheep of Yitro, his father-in-law, the Kohen, the priest of Midian. He guided the sheep far into the wilderness, and he arrived at the mountain of God, toward Horeb, the mountain of God. This, of course, is Mount Sinai. We don't know that yet. It's a little bit of a spoiler I'm giving you. An angel of Hashem appeared to him in a blaze of fire from amid the bush. Again, this is the famous burning bush that was not consumed. And he saw and behold, the bush was burning in the fire, but the bush was not consumed. Moshe thought, I will turn aside now and look at this great sight. Why will the bush not be burned? So he was taken by this phenomenon. And this was the test. If he had said, oh, interesting, burning bush, and walked on, he was busy. He had sheep to attend to. You have to pay attention. And his attention was diverted now. And he saw this, and he stopped what he was doing, and he turned aside. And this was really what sealed his fate, the fact that he stopped. Hashem sent him a sign. Signs are only good if the person who it's directed toward picks up on it, and realizes it and sees it. And Moshe saw this. What's going on here? Something is happening. And no sooner had he stopped to ponder this phenomenon, this unnatural phenomenon that we read in verse 4, Hashem saw that he turned aside to see, and God, again, there's this interplay between the word Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, one name of Hashem, God, Elohim, another name, which is always very fascinating because each name reveals a different aspect, a different way that Hashem relates to us. But Hashem saw that he turned aside to see, and God called out to him from amid the bush and said, Moshe, Moshe. And he replied, Hineni, here I am. That Hineni, the same thing that Avraham said to God, the same thing that Yosef would say to his father when Yaakov said, go, Yosef, check out your brothers. Hineni, here I am. I'm ready. I'm here. I'm all here. I'm on board. I'm yours. That's what Hineni means. And Hashem then said to him, he said, do not come closer to here. Remove your shoes from your feet, for the place upon which you stand is holy ground. That is the source of why we don't wear shoes, certainly leather shoes, on the Temple Mount, because it's holy ground. The source is right here. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzchak, and the God of Yaakov. And Moshe hid his face at that point. He stopped staring at this phenomenon and hid his face, for he was afraid to gaze toward God. So yeah, if you can imagine this confrontation, it's mind-boggling. I mean, Moshe, all of a sudden out of nowhere, he's just tending to his sheep. And in fact, there's a beautiful midrash that says he happened to be in this particular place because he saw one of his sheep had wandered off, and not considering for a second that he had lost, this lost sheep was lost forever. He went to rescue it, and he ran after where he imagined it went. And of course, that's when he came upon this bush. So this midrash sends the message that it was his compassion and his concern for every sheep in the flock, right? For every member of the flock that led him to this confrontation, to this meeting with Hashem. And of course, Moshe, yes, he would be concerned with every member of the flock of Israel. And that is the sign of a leader and a prophet. So that's a little midrashic touch to the entire story. But then Hashem says to him something very curious. Verse 7, now we're in chapter 3, verse 7. Hashem said, I have indeed seen the affliction of my people that is in Egypt, and I have heard its outcry because of its taskmasters, for I have known of its sufferings. So this is picking up from a verse that was a little bit earlier, where it says, I'm looking for it, but if I don't find it, I'm just going to paraphrase it. Oh, here. In verse 23 of chapter 2, right before this story, it says, during those many days, it happened that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel groaned because of the work, and they cried out. Their outcry because of the work went up to God. God heard their moaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Yitzhak, and with Yaakov. God saw the children of Israel, and God knew. So this whole meeting with Moshe was really initiated by the cry of Israel. The cry of Israel to God because of the pain they were suffering, because of their enslavement and their affliction. It said God remembered them. And if God remembered them, then it kind of implies that until then, God forgot them. Now, I don't think that God really can forget, but the concept that God would forget us is terrifying. The concept that we wouldn't be in God's consciousness, that we wouldn't be part of God's world is beyond terrifying. But God remembered. Why did God remember? Because the children cried out. God had made a covenant with Abraham and with Yitzhak, with Yaakov, and he said to Abraham, this is what's going to happen, and I will rescue them. But until Israel cried out to Hashem, it wasn't going to happen. God hears us. And if we want God to hear us, and we want God to make a change to help us in our plight, we need to cry out. Our voice is crucial. Our voice is necessary. We cannot be passive. We cannot sit back and say, God will take care of it, even though we fully trust in Hashem's love and his compassion and that everything will work out right. We have to cry out. We have to say, we need you now. We need your intervention now. And so it was that crying out that inspired Hashem to set up this meeting, this rendezvous with Moshe at the bush to get the ball rolling. And then, of course, we're running out of time now, but we go into this fascinating type of give and take, of negotiation between Moshe and God. And God just says to Moshe, you're the man, you're the one who's going to save the people. I'm sending you back in to do it. And Moshe says, whoa, hold on a minute. And Moshe has all sorts of conditions and all sorts of things that he's afraid that he's not up to the job. And then God has this plan. And as soon as Moshe finally agrees to this plan, how God's going to, send all these things to, Moshe's going to go right up to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And it sounds like that's going to do the trick. And only when Moshe's already on his way back to Egypt, and God says, well, it's not going to be that simple. You're going to go, and you're going to say, Pharaoh, let my people go so they can worship me, Hashem, for 3 days in the desert, and then they'll come back. And Pharaoh is going to say, no way. In fact, if you're even thinking about such a thing, it means that the people of Israel, these Hebrew slaves, aren't working hard enough. So, of course, he makes things worse for them and embitters their life even more, which, of course, leads Moshe to be completely discouraged by the end of Parshat Shemot, which we're reading, and that leads us also to the end of Temple Talk. Thank you so much for being with me. Temple Talk.